Blackmore also criticizes the narrow neurological approach by dismissively quoting Francis Crick's throwaway comment, "You're nothing but a pack of neurons." Blackmore says, quote, there are at least two problems with this. First, you do not feel like a pack of neurons. So what the theory needs and does not provide is an explanation of how a pack of neurons comes to believe that it is actually an independent conscious self. Second, the theory does not say which neurons. It cannot be all neurons because I am not consciously aware of most of what goes on in my brain. I do not identify with the neurons that control glucose levels in my blood or the fine movements that keep me sitting up straight. On the other hand, if you try to identify self neurons, you are doomed to trouble. All neurons look much the same under the microscope, and all of them are doing something all the time, regardless of what I am doing, end quote. Blackmore notes that Crick's position is extremely reductionist in the sense that it ignores emergentism and different levels of explanation, quote. Crick not only assumes that you are utterly dependent upon the actions of nerve cells, most neuroscientists assume that, but that you are nothing but the pack of neurons. Other scientists assume that new phenomena may emerge from simpler ones and cannot be understood by understanding the underlying neurons and their connections. For example, we cannot understand human intentions, motivations, or emotions just by observing the behavior and connections of neurons, any more than we can understand the activity of a desktop computer by looking at its chips and circuits. On this more common view, the intentions depend completely on the neurons, just as the computation depends completely on the chips in the computer. But to understand them, we must work at a more appropriate level of explanation. But what is the appropriate level of explanation for the self? The behavior of neurons seems to miss it, end quote. Several theorists have moved beyond the reductive biological approach to the self by proposing a split between the I and the me. Rita Carter claims that there are clearly two sides to the self. On the one hand, there's, quote, the permanent objective self that other people recognize and that we ourselves think of as being always there. The me that continues to exist through the deepest, longest sleep. And there is also the active experiencing self, the I that thinks, feels, and acts, end quote. Tor Noratranders specifically identifies the I with the deconstructed illusory self that we looked at in the first 3 units of this course, quote. It is not a person's conscious I that really initiates an action, but it is quite clearly the person himself. there is a difference between the I and the person as a whole. End quote. He says that the whole person is clearly more than the I. Quote. But, he says, the I does not want to accept this. The thinking conscious I insists on being the true player, the active operator, the one in charge, but it cannot be. The point of Libet's delay is not that it is not people themselves who decide when to undertake an action. The point is that it is not people's consciousness that begins the process, but something else, non-conscious. It is still myself who disposes, but it is not my I that has the power to dispose. It is me. End quote.